today has been fantastic. Shareable. Our mission is to empower communities to share, and one of the ways we do that is through our online publication at shareable.net, and we have something like 4,000 case studies, on our website, and I've got some, awesome news story ideas from today, and I think what I see happening here is equal with any place I've been, but of course with your own local twist, Korean twist, right? And so I'm gonna, share some observations about Cosmo local production in the USA, and Cosmo local production. Some people call it like open manufacturing. And it's this idea of design global and manufacture local, right? And the twist on what Cosmo local adds to it is that it's done in a commons format, right? So peer-to-peer commons format. And my observations about what's happening in the United States. I don't claim that they're like comprehensive. Just to give you a starting idea of some of the things happening there and some of the trends there, and also the way I'm kind of thinking about them too. So a little bit of analysis also. So. Before really thinking, and what we're really interested is because we're an NGO, we're interested in helping this change happen. And I think before thinking about a transition to Cosmo local production, I think you have to really think about the institutional matrix in which the larger manufacturing sector is embedded, and it might look like the following, okay? And what I'm talking about is the set of institutions that support it, the whole ecosystem, right? And I call it the Cosmo local production stack, right? Just for fun, we can start with that. And there's 8 levels, right? So it starts with vision 1. 2 is values, 3 is goals, 4 is human and social capital, 5 is finance, 6 is governance, 7 is policy, and 8 is technology. And just short comments. So 1, vision. This is the stories that we tell ourselves about what manufacturing is, right, and what it's for. Is it a way to get rich, or is it a way that we can educate the public? And so forth. And then 2, values, what people value, their priorities in manufacturing. Are the priorities, for instance, to make sure that everyone gets served, or are the priorities to just make profit, right? Goals. And this is how the vision and values are translated into kind of concrete targets. Human and social capital, and this is how humans are prepared developmentally and mobilized to realize those goals. And then finance, how manufacturing is funded, and also the accounting systems and so forth, right? Governance, you have very neoliberal models like in Silicon Valley, where I'm from, where it's very tightly controlled, like Facebook, for instance, where Mark Zuckerberg has all the power, and it's a kind of totalitarian system and nightmare, and all the way to the blockchain, where you have a completely distributed systems, and it's kind of bleeding edge and maybe very hard to actually realize, and more in the middle than our traditional co-ops, where the users actually own and govern the enterprise. And then and the governance is how the rules are made and by who, right? Within an enterprise or outside in the larger thing. And then policy is actually the rules guiding manufacturing, the structure of the market that results in, and technology there's things like 3D printers and so forth that are used in the manufacturing process. So this, the institutional matrix that I've kind of outlined in the United States, this, almost exclusively supports market-based, profit-driven manufacturing sector. And, the evidence that cosmo-local production, which is that a commons-based variant of local production, scarce evidence that that it has its own institutional matrix, or it's supported by the mainstream institutional matrix, and except I would say that the technology is definitely driving it and it's an enabler. It doesn't guarantee that it's going to be peer-to-peer or commons-based, right? And then I think the most promising area is that it is, one of the biggest uses of it is in the educational setting and STEM education, and more on that in a little bit. And what exists then, some of the kind of case studies, they have kind of varying levels of viability, and some have uncertain futures, and there's I don't see like a large number of robust enterprises around this. And I'll be curious what the other panelists say. Maybe I welcome like disagreement. Okay, so bring it if you see something different. There's Local Motors, and they make a lot of noise about their Cosmo local production. They don't call it that, but they kind of combine agile manufacturing with a kind of crowdsourcing approach to like rapidly prototype. They're an automobile manufacturer, and they it's really small scale, and I'm not sure how Cosmo local they are actually. They're definitely not commons based, but their latest product is it's like a autonomous vehicle that's a kind of a shuttle bus, very high tech, trying to create a different like digital transit experience, and they've had some success selling this into certain transportation systems in cities around the world, but kind of just getting going on that. But that their design global and manufacture local is a core piece of their identity as a company and their branding. So they're super vocal about it, and they're American, so they tell a good story. Okay, they tell a good story. There's Farm Hack, which is comment oriented, and it's an open source farm tech innovation community and not limited to the United States. There's the open source ecology, which their focus was the global village construction set, which was trying to build 50 of the most essential tools for civilization in an open source format. It kind of faded in the last couple of years, it seems. They were able to produce 12 of the 50 prototypes and got 4 of those prototypes to documentation stage. I'm not sure if any of their machines are in production right now or much in use. So, and then there are hacker spaces, maker spaces, fab labs. There's, it's hard to say the number of them, and they're each a little bit different. Hacker spaces for kind of like making electronic devices and software, and maker spaces are more general purpose making and often community oriented. Sometimes in libraries, that's becoming a trend. And then fab labs, there's a kind of research and educational component often with those, and in universities. And then on top of that sort of ecosystem of maker spaces, hacker spaces, fab labs, is is a large collection. I don't know how many exactly, but I'm guessing a pretty significant number of projects that are focused on like a specific product and niche, often with a social benefit. Like a good example is medical devices like umbilical cord clamps and the like that in the commercial market are extremely expensive, but don't need to be, and can be then offered, made cheaply, high quality, but inexpensive, and then can better serve those in need. That a little bit of lay of the land, and even though I'm a little bit skeptical about the viability of cosmo-local production, what is clear is that the drivers behind the shift to more local production, I think, are multiplying and in some cases intensifying, right? So the declining cost of manufacturing technology, it seems to be on this downward curve and continuing to move in that direction. There's a narrowing in the global labor arbitrage. So wages in the developing world are rising, and so there is less incentive for the United States to do more outsourcing like in the past. There's changing consumer taste, so U.S. consumers definitely want more customized products, and if they're local and highly unique, then that's a bonus, right? That makes you're cooler if you've got something like that. There seems to be really widespread and serious efforts by cities and states to rebuild their local manufacturing sector, and there are a collection of cities that have like urban maker and urban manufacturing associations and alliances. There's one in San Francisco called SF Made as an example, and so they can work together, create an ecosystem, lobby the city, and so forth. There's also the U.S. hasn't been able to export their waste like they have in the past, and landfills are filling up. So there is, I think, more pressure on local localities to think about how to manage, avoid, and repurpose waste in new ways, including using it as an input in local manufacturing. There's, you might have noticed the increasing, international trade instability, and I don't need to mention any names here, right? Do I? Our president has caused some, I'd say, a great deal of uncertainty, and then the fragility of global supply chains, I think, is increasing in an era of climate change and lots of natural disasters and macroeconomic and geopolitical risk. So, I think the chances that this shift to local production will transition to a cosmo-local format are pretty low unless there are significant changes in the institutional matrix to support transition, right? So, if you want to stimulate more cosmo-local production, then you need to intervene at all levels of that stack, all those 8 levels, not just 1 or 2, to get systemic change. And otherwise, I think success is limited and even temporary. And that's some of the enterprises that I mentioned that seem to be the kind of the dynamic there. And we can play at the margins of these of the system, or in the niches of the system, try to grow those seed forms directly. But I don't think this will result in transformation, but does result in kind of I think important exhibition, showing what's possible. I think that's especially important if there is a kind of systemic crisis, and there is then an option that lays in wait to be expanded, to be taken up, right? But at the same time, I don't think we should place too much faith in seed forms. And that's, I've been doing Shareable for 10 years, and we've written, as I said, about thousands of these projects, and we have seen the world through that lens. But if you look at that world from the outside, from the establishment, from the existing institutions, then there's many reasons to be somewhat skeptical, or maybe just more realistic, right, about what's possible. And there's a really good historical example I'll share that seed forms, they don't necessarily signify anything about the future. They can just as easily signify zero, signify nothing. And take the American material feminists in the 19th and early 20th century, as described by Dolores Hayden, this feminist scholar, in this great book. Actually, Sharon Eady turned me onto it, right? It's called The Grand Domestic Revolution. So these pioneering women, these progressive era reformers, they imagine residences, neighborhoods, and cities organized to liberate women from isolating and oppressive domestic labor by the sharing of resources and labor through apartment hotels, communal kitchens, and even meal delivery services. Like meal delivery services, like a recent trend in the United States now. They're like Blue Apron, these where they deliver a meal kit to you, and you make the meal. You make the meal, and the ingredients are all already portioned out. And you get a recipe and everything, right? And some of these ideas they imagined and wrote about, and some of them they actually built. And this is 100 years ago and more, right? But this well-articulated vision has been virtually forgotten and entirely bypassed. And instead, what the United States chose is to fund and shape through policy and excellent storytelling. Americans, they know how to sell if they know how to do anything. The keystone of the American dream, which is the single-family home, right? So 70% of Americans live in a standalone structure on their own plot of land, and one family only in that. And so, those sprawling suburban landscapes that you see, there's a lot of problems that they generate. They contribute to global warming, and they create one of the most wasteful, isolating, segregated, and unequal societies of modern economies. So we missed this huge opportunity, even though it was like a super great idea and was well thought out, and also not necessarily in the margins. These were prominent progressive reformers. So this is just to reinforce that without a supportive institutional matrix, cosmo-local production, has little chance of becoming a major mode of manufacturing. I think there's still some bright spots, and I want to share some additional, observations just to wrap up. We talked about Fab Labs and makerspaces and so forth. But Fab Labs and makerspaces the trend is that they're growing definitely, and also integrating into other institutions, like into schools and libraries, and they vary in size from very modest things, often in libraries, to very fully equipped facilities in universities. And I think that growth continues. There's still a lot of interest. I think it's connected to the desire and the cultural, I think, the zeitgeist to more STEM education. One really interesting feature of this is that a good number of them, a significant percentage, are in community colleges, which in the United States since four-year universities have become exorbitantly expensive, community college is actually very reasonable and the least expensive way to get a start at your college education. So this is making Fab Labs, I think, very accessible to young adults, especially. There is also, I think, a very sharp kind of and remarkable sort of democratization of product design and creation that at all those stages of making a product, from conceiving of it to designing it, funding it, prototyping it, and then even selling it. This is that whole chain. Every piece of it has gotten less expensive. So if you go on Facebook, I think we're in an era of kind of a product design, renaissance almost. And I don't see much of that being in the Commons format, though. It could lead to that. I'm not really sure. And then on the funding piece, like I was looking at Kickstarter statistics, and the fastest growing and largest piece of the funding mix is projects $10,000 and under. So that to me indicates like it's a kind of on ramp that it's popular, right? Got it. On the other hand, there's been some, kind of puzzling. I have questions about it. I don't really understand it, and maybe this can be part of the discussion. But Make Magazine has gone out of business, and Make Media. There's no more Maker Fairs. That's kaput. Tech Shops, which was a kind of brand name for maker spaces in the United States, and there's a lot of storytelling around Tech Shop. I think they helped really popularize the idea of a makerspace. They're gone, right? Etsy, went public, and they've compromised their standards. So you don't. If on Etsy it used to be, you can't sell a product unless you make it, and now that you don't. That's no longer a requirement. MakerBot, which popularized the idea of 3D printing. Brie Pettis, you could say he was a kind of Steve Jobs of 3D printing. Put a factory in everyone's desk. That was the kind of idea. It all started out open source. They raised venture capital and then ended up selling the company for somewhere close to $500 million. Stopped supporting the open source versions of their products. So that seems like some steps backwards even, and it just raises questions. I mean, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit. Like, why did these enterprises fail? Was it poorly run, or did market conditions change, or is the development of this trend maturing so you don't need these kind of evangelists and popularizers of it? So that, and then another thing is like thinking about I think there's some question about the goals of at the strategic level. What is this whole thing for? What is it supposed to serve? What is its place in society? I think there's some kind of confusion about cosmo-local production. Maybe the speakers to come can, I'm sure they will, shed some light on that question. And but in terms of manufacturing in general in the United States, like the high volume stuff is usually often done outside the United States. That doesn't seem to be coming back strongly. Though the front end of the production, the manufacturing process seems to be shifting back home, right? So the design piece, the funding piece, the prototyping, or if it's like a small batch, right? Production, a lot of that action is actually happening in urban settings. And so the idea is then yeah, once you get something ironed out, you got the product, buttoned down, then you put it into production and you find the best manufacturer, the cheapest manufacturer outside the United States. So yeah, so just to wrap up, I think the most likely scenario for this cosmolocal production to becoming a major mode is probably if there's really serious disruptions and the space is made for this to be really taken up. There'll just be overwhelming need for it, and communities will have to serve themselves more. And then one cool thing, one opportunity I see also is that there are more and more cities that are doing sharing hubs and thinking about putting a physical physical space that with a variety of sharing services to serve the community and kind of build a kind of critical mass of attention and use, and help tip the community to a more commons exchanges and so forth. I think it'd be really cool if you combine sharing and making into these centers, so that you can do some activities that I think often are related. For instance, like repairing things and upcycling things. And so you start to think of sharing, making, recycling, upcycling, recycling, all these resource management things as a kind of together as a kind of set of activities that are kind of coherent way of life, and also a new facet of what it means to be a citizen. That if you take care of resources well in your community and do it with your neighbors, this is a profound act of citizenship. So I'll just close with that, and thank you very much. 감사합니다.
산업혁명이 시작되면 때부터 이 생산이라고 하는 행위가 계속 공간적으로 집중이 됐었죠. 그래서 공장으로 집중됐는데 그 다음부터는 그 공장의 크기가 점점 커져가지고 20세기 중반이 되면은 거대한 도시 전체가 하나의 그 플랜트가 됩니다. 그런데 그래서 20세기 중반에 그 생산이라고 하는 기지의 모습을 보면 군대랑 비슷했는데 지금 21세기에 그 200년 동안의 경향이 근본적으로 바뀌는 건 틀림이 없습니다. 그래서 생산의 여러 단계와 유형적인 것, 무형적인 것이 지금 다 흩어져 있고, 그래서 그 공간의 범위라고 하는 것도 어떤 거는 지구적으로 되고 어떤 거는 아주 지역적으로 되기도 하는데, 여기에서 이게 과연 커먼즈랑 직접적으로 연결될 수 있는지에 대해서 당연히 우리는 조심스러울 필요가 있고, 이게 지금 어떻게 연결될지에 대해서 많이 고민을 해야 되겠습니다만은, 지금 말씀하신 대로 여기서 어떤 그 굉장히 제조업이라고 하는 것에 있어가지고 근원적인 지각 변동이 나타나고 있는 건 틀림이 없는 것 같습니다. 그래서